This is my fill valve, and this video walks through everything that's important to know when finding a new one and putting it in. First, there are a few ways to find a good replacement. You can try to find the original part number. If you can't find the number on the part itself, you can usually trace it by using the number inside of the tank. But you may not always be able to find that part number, especially if it's an older toilet, and you may not want to use the original style if it's an older style. Newer fill valve models have improved flow adjustment mechanisms and better anti-siphon capabilities, which can be a code requirement consideration. Be sure to check the code in your area. Another option is to take the old one off and take it to the store as a reference. This means the project has to start first though. It can take a toilet out of commission for a little while, and it can be messy if the old one's dirty or the gasket's deteriorating. Another option, and the easiest in my opinion, is to measure the tank height. The valve needs to be tall enough to stand above the overflow tube and short enough to fit inside of the tank. There's also a hole on the bottom of the tank that the valve passes through to connect to the supply line. This should be a standard size. Most valves will fit most holes, so don't need to worry about that. A few other things to keep in mind are the space available within the tank to make sure that the valve clears the handle lever and the overflow tube, the gallons per flush of the toilet. Most, after 1994, will have 1.6 gallons per flush or less, but some of the older ones can have 3.6 or more and have taller tanks that need taller valves because they have more liquid to flush. The description on the box or the website will usually provide information on pairing recommendations for the valve and gallons per flush. It's also good to know if the toilet is outside of the box. If it's a one-piece low profile, it might need a different type of valve. So what type of valves are there? Some of the more common types are rod and ball. This is an old type out there that in most cases can be replaced with a new type. Float cup, one of the more common types out there. Comes in two flavors, the older external float cup and the newer internal float cup. And for those out-of-the-box toilets, the floatless low profile, which is less common. But why choose one over the other within the same family? Some things to keep in mind are the adjustable height range, which can be different amongst valves in the same category. Fill rates can also be different, both for the tank fill and the fill tube, which fills the bowl. Some valves will be adjustable to tune fill rates. Some are easier to adjust than others. For example, some will have a knob to adjust the fill tube fill rate, while others will have to have the jet swapped. Another consideration is some come with other features, such as quiet filling. Construction materials can also be different. This can affect the lifespan of the valve, depending on the chemicals in your water or cleaning agents. Warranties may also be different and can be a good proxy for the quality of the valve and materials. Some may also come as part of a kit. With the new valve in hand, it's time to install it. The first step, turn off the water using the valve behind the toilet. If the valve is super old and you can't turn it off, you can either replace it or turn off the water to the house. With the water turned off, flush the toilet to drain the water out of the tank. Hold the handle for a few seconds to drain as much as possible. There will probably be some water still left in the bottom of the tank, so use a large sponge or a towel to soak it up and move it to a bucket. With the tank empty, it's time to remove the supply line. Some V-jaw channel locks can be helpful here. With the supply line off, it's time to remove the plastic mounting nut underneath the tank that holds the valve to the toilet. The nut should be hand tight, but if it's stuck, some channel locks can be helpful. This is where any water left in the tank will spill onto the floor, so it may be good to have something to catch it if the tank isn't completely dry. With the nut removed, take off the old fill tube and lift the valve out of the tank. If the old gasket leaves behind a bunch of residue, like mine did, it may be good to clean it up so that the new gasket has a nice smooth surface to seal against. And now, it's time to install the new valve. First, I adjusted the height of the new valve using the old valve as a reference, measuring from the top of the valve head to the flange that the gasket rests up against. Height adjustment on each valve will be a little different. In my case, all I had to do was twist, and the float was already connected. Some valves may need it connected. Then, I adjusted the float using the old valve as a reference again. If it looks good, it's time to put it in. But before dropping the valve in the tank, give the gasket a quick check for orientation. Make sure the tapered part is facing away from the top of the valve. This will seat in the hole in the tank and provide a good seal. Also, snug it up evenly against the flange if it's not. And now, place the valve in the tank, passing the threads through the hole in the bottom. Next, loosely install the plastic nut underneath the tank. Then, check the orientation of the valve and adjust it if needed. There needs to be enough space so that the fill valve doesn't hit the overflow tube, the handle lever, and that the fill tube has enough room to get to the overflow tube without hitting anything. Next, give it another height check. Make sure the top of the fill valve is above the top of the overflow tube. In my case, it needed to be about 3 inches above. Check the instructions. This prevents tank water from flowing back into the fill valve in overflow situations. Now, for the fill tube. The valve will come with a clip. Attach the clip to one end of the fill tube, then attach the clip fill tube combo to the overflow tube such that the fill tube discharges into the overflow tube. This is how the bowl is filled. And then attach the other end of the fill tube to the fill valve. If the fill tube is too long, it can be trimmed with scissors. If everything looks good inside of the tank, snug the plastic nut underneath the tank. I tightened mine to hand tight plus a quarter turn to make sure that it was snug, but not too snug because it's a plastic nut with plastic threads and I didn't want to break it or strip it. With the nut snug, it's time to install the supply line. If it's really old, it might be a good time to replace it. If a new supply line is needed, here are a few good things to know while shopping for a new one. Most will be 3/8 of an inch compression fitting on the end that attaches to the supply valve and 7/8 of an inch on the end that attaches to the fill valve. They can be found in a variety of lengths, commonly from 9 inches all the way up to 20 inches or more. So while shopping, it's helpful to know the distance between the supply valve and the bottom of the tank. It's best to use a braided line. Commonly they come in braided polymer and braided stainless steel. Pay attention to the thread and attachment types. If the fill valve has plastic threads, it'll match well with the supply line that has plastic threads. To reattach the supply line, thread the large end onto the fill valve threads sticking out underneath the tank. These are standard threads. It'll be righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Again, I snugged this up to hand tight plus about a quarter of a turn. And if using a new supply line, it needs to be reattached to the supply valve, which is the route I went. Start the threads by hand to make sure they're not cross-threaded. Then tighten it down with a wrench to compress the fitting. You can see here, I'm using one hand to brace the valve so that I don't damage the plumbing, and the other hand to tighten it down with a wrench. With the supply line reattached, turn the water supply back on. And give it a quick check. Make sure the fill valve is filling the tank, the fill tube is flowing, and there are no leaks underneath the toilet. If everything looks good, let the tank fill and check the water line when it stops. Should stop about a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch below the top of the overflow tube. If it doesn't, like mine didn't, adjust the float to adjust the water level in the tank. The float is a mechanism that floats and is attached to the fill valve through linkage that turns off the water supply once the float reaches a certain level. In my case, the water was low, so I needed to raise the float to allow more water into the tank before the float turned off the valve. Once the water level is set, good to go, all done. All right, that's it. We're a small channel trying to get out there and help people, so if it earned it, give it a thumbs up. It really helps us out. If you want to see more projects, subscribe. Good luck out there, and thanks for watching.